Have you ever, just looked at the absolute chaotic state of the world today?
Oh, yeah. Every single morning when I open the news.
Right. It's just relentless headlines, economic shifts, cultural upheavals everywhere. And I think a lot of us wish there was some kind of, hidden pattern to it all.
Some sort of formula.
Exactly. A formula that could definitively tell us if we are, I don't know, headed for this glorious golden age, or if we're just standing right on the precipice of a total collapse.
Yeah, because usually when we look for answers like that, we expect a certain level of precision, right? Like structural engineering.
Yeah, you see a crack in the foundation, you calculate the weight, and boom, you know exactly when the building comes down.
Right, but when you step into the world of human history, suddenly the math it just doesn't work anymore. We're looking at a landscape that is incredibly murky.
It's just so messy.
It's the ultimate complex system. I mean, billions of variables, infinite cross currents. And it's a landscape that naturally makes us desperate for a map, you know? We want someone to look at the massive swirling mess of human existence and just find the underlying rhythm.
We really crave that grand narrative, just something to assure us that the chaos isn't just random static.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the actual mission of our deep dive today.
Yeah.
So we've got this fascinating stack of sources on the table right now: archival transcripts, commentaries from historians, our own research notes.
Some really incredible material.
Yeah, and we're going to use them to unpack this legendary high-stakes intellectual duel. This was an actual debate broadcast on the BBC's third program back in January and March of 1948.
Such a wild time for debate like this.
Right. We are looking at a profound clash between two monumental historical thinkers over a question that, honestly, still completely haunts us today. Like, is history a science that can save us, or is it just this infinitely complex web that defies all absolute rules?
To really grasp the gravity of this BBC broadcast, you have to mentally place yourself in London in 1948.
Yeah, the context is basically everything here.
It really is. The world is barely 3 years out from the most traumatic, devastating conflict in human history. I mean, World War II just flattened entire continents.
Literal rubble outside people's windows.
Exactly. The Holocaust had just revealed the absolute darkest depths of what humans are capable of, and suddenly, the atomic bomb exists.
Like, the stakes are just instantly astronomical.
People are incredibly anxious. They are literally looking at the bombed-out buildings in London and asking, is this it? Is this the end of the Western story?
Wow.
And into this climate of just profound existential unease steps an English historian named Arnold Toynbee. And he's carrying this massive, incredibly ambitious work called A Study of History.
Oh, this thing is a behemoth. Like a 6-volume behemoth.
Right.
And that was just the portion he managed to publish before the war.
Yeah, he wrote more later.
It's wild. Toynbee basically walks up to this totally traumatized global audience and claims, hey, I've found the hidden architecture. He believes he has actually discovered a recognizable pattern in the seemingly confusing spectacle of human history spanning like 6,000 years of recorded time.
Which is an audacious claim.
Highly audacious. He's offering a grand theory of why societies rise and, I guess more importantly for a 1948 audience, why they fall.
And you can easily imagine the psychological relief that kind of grand narrative provides, right?
No, absolutely. Like, don't worry, it's just part of the cycle.
Yeah, but any theory that attempts to explain literally everything immediately attracts the absolute fiercest kind of academic scrutiny, which introduces the second voice in this incredible debate.
The challenger.
The challenger. The Dutch historian Pieter Geyl. So, born in 1887, Geyl is just a heavyweight. He's a professor of modern history at Utrecht University, but his credentials span the entire globe.
He's taught everywhere, right?
Oh, yeah. University of London, Harvard, Princeton. He delivered the Terry Lectures at Yale. He is deeply, deeply steeped in empirical, localized history.
Right. He's the guy you call when you want to know literally everything about the Dutch Revolt in the 16th century, down to the last, guilder.
Exactly. He built his entire career on what's called the Great Netherlands view of history. So he focuses on the intricate, super messy realities of very specific regions.
So we have this amazing setup. You have Toynbee, who is the ultimate macro historian trying to, chart the entire cosmos.
Yeah.
Facing off against Geyl, the ultimate micro historian who absolutely knows that the devil is always in the details. Geyl steps up to that BBC microphone to rigorously challenge Toynbee's grand system. He's really serving as the voice of rigorous skepticism here.
And the clash of their methodologies is just stark. But before we can really understand Geyl's attack, we have to first build Toynbee's universe.
We have to see what he's attacking.
Right. So Toynbee starts by fundamentally shifting the lens of historical study. He argues that historians obsess way too much over national states.
Like just looking at France or just looking at England.
Yeah. Studying France or England in total isolation, he argues, is like trying to understand the whole ocean by staring at one single wave.
Oh, I like that analogy.
It's powerful.
Yeah.
Instead, Toynbee zooms way, way out to look at much larger units of human organization. He calls these units civilizations. And get this, out of the entire 6,000-year span of recorded human history,
Right.
he identifies just 21 of these civilizations.
Okay, let's just pause on that for a second. 21. Out of all of human history, that is, Toynbee is treating human existence like this massive global time-lapse video.
Yeah, a really fast one.
He's pulling the camera back so incredibly far that individual nations, individual wars, entire plagues, they all just blur into 21 massive weather systems rolling across the centuries.
It is an incredibly seductive way to look at the world, especially, again, in that post-war environment.
It takes the sting out of the immediate terrors, doesn't it? Like, a world war feels a whole lot less apocalyptic if you just believe it's a predictable pressure front moving through a 6,000-year cycle.
It places individual trauma into this grand, almost geological time frame.
Yeah.
But the trade-off is that it strips away the granular human experience.
Which is exactly my concern with this kind of massive macro history. When you zoom out to 30,000 feet, you completely lose sight of the actual humans on the ground who are making the day-to-day decisions. Like, how does a civilization even begin to move in Toynbee's model? What is the actual engine driving these 21 massive systems?
So Toynbee has a very specific mechanism for this, and he calls it the law of challenge and response.
Challenge and response.
Yes, this is the core engine of his entire theory. According to Toynbee, civilizations do not organically grow out of easy, comfortable conditions.
Like if you live in a tropical paradise.
Right. A society living in a paradise with abundant food and perfect weather, they don't spontaneously build a globe-spanning civilization.
Because there's zero friction. Like,
Right.
why invent the wheel if you never have to carry anything anywhere, right?
Precisely. Toynbee theorizes that civilizations only emerge when humans face formidable obstacles and really severe hardships, and then actually overcome them.
The friction forces the innovation.
Exactly. It is the friction of adversity that forces humanity to innovate and organize. But Toynbee actually takes it a step further. The best qualities brought out by these severe hardships aren't just, technological or militaristic.
Okay.
For Toynbee, these qualities are fundamentally spiritual.
Spiritual qualities. Wait, hold on. When Toynbee uses the word spiritual here, is he talking about actual religious devotion like going to church? Or does he mean something closer to, like, morale and collective human willpower?
It's a bit of both, honestly, but it heavily leans toward the latter in the early stages of a civilization. By spiritual, Toynbee really means a profound internal cohesion.
Like a shared purpose.
Right, a shared sense of destiny, an élan vital that totally unites a people. When a society successfully overcomes a brutal environment, they don't just build, better irrigation ditches. They forge a unified, creative worldview.
They level up culturally.
They do. They gain new cultural ground. And as long as they keep successfully responding to new challenges, Toynbee argues, there is no predestined end to their growth. They can literally go on growing indefinitely.
Okay, if we apply Toynbee's logic to that 1948 audience, or, even to our own lives today, it's a remarkably comforting thought.
It really is.
It implies that comfort is actually the enemy of progress. Massive economic crises, global conflict, climate disasters in Toynbee's model, these aren't just senseless tragedies. They're the exact necessary fuel for a new cultural renaissance.
Right.
It reframes suffering as the precise catalyst required for future greatness.
It transforms collective trauma into a heroic origin story.
Wow, yeah.
But here's the thing. Toynbee's adversity as fuel theory hits a massive logical wall as soon as you look at the extremes. And this is exactly what Geyl noticed. This becomes Geyl's first major strike against Toynbee's supposedly scientific framework.
Right, because if a little hardship builds character, does a catastrophic disaster build a superpower? Like, if we look at extreme natural disasters, say Pompeii, that wasn't exactly a catalyst for Roman innovation. The volcano just buried them.
And Toynbee, to his credit, actually realizes this mathematical problem in his own theory.
Oh, he does?
Yeah. Initially, he states the thesis super boldly. The greater the challenge, the greater the stimulus. He claims he hadn't found any palpable limits in his whole historical survey.
That's a huge claim.
But eventually, reality forces him to meditate on what he calls an overriding law. He introduces a pretty big caveat to his absolute rule.
The classic law with an exception maneuver.
Oh, yes. Toynbee concludes that there are challenges of a salutary severity that stimulate a creative response.
Salutary meaning beneficial.
Right. But there are also challenges of an overwhelming severity to which the human subject just simply succumbs.
Like Pompeii.
Exactly. And he dresses this up in very scientific sociological terminology. He basically declares that the most stimulating challenge is found in a mean between a deficiency of severity and an excess of it.
So he's basically pitching a Goldilocks theory of historical trauma. Not too soft, not too hard, but just right.
Yes, the golden mean.
But wait a second. If we look at Toynbee's salutary severity, it sounds a lot to me like lifting weights.
Oh, so?
Like if you lift a challenging weight, you create micro tears in your muscle and it grows back stronger. That's salutary.
Yeah.
But if you drop a 500-pound barbell on your chest, it doesn't stimulate muscle growth. It just totally crushes your ribs. That's overwhelming.
Right.
So Geyl is essentially accusing Toynbee of dressing up basic, obvious biological and physical realities as a profound sociological law.
That is a perfect encapsulation of Geyl's critique. Geyl literally calls it the knock on the head metaphor.
A knock on the head.
Yeah, he points out to the audience that if someone gives you a moderate knock on the head, your energy is roused, right? You strike back.
Yeah, you get mad and fight.
But if the knock is so severe it renders you totally unconscious, well, your energy dries up forever. And Geyl is telling the BBC audience that you do not need to conduct a massive, supposedly empirical historical investigation across 6,000 years to deduce that a fatal blow is, in fact, fatal.
It's just common sense masquerading as an empirical discovery.
Exactly. And it creates a huge methodological trap for Toynbee.
Right, because if you're building a sociological law that claims to be deeply scientific, you need a mechanism to measure the trauma before the outcome. Like, how does Toynbee define what is too much severity versus just enough before the civilization either thrives or dies?
And that is the fatal flaw Geyl completely exposes. The law itself has absolutely nothing to say about where this golden mean actually lies.
Yeah.
Every single time, Toynbee has to define it anew by subjective observation after the fact.
I see.
If a civilization survives a harsh desert, Toynbee declares the desert was a salutary severity.
Right.
But if the civilization dies in the exact same desert, he declares the desert was of overwhelming severity. It is pure, unfiltered, circular reasoning.
He's totally painting the bullseye around the arrow after he shoots it.
Yes.
He looks at the survivors and says, their challenge was optimal.
Yeah.
That completely shatters his whole claim to be strictly empirical.
It does. And Geyl goes even further into the mechanics of this cherry picking. He points out that in any given historical situation, the supposed challenge, like a harsh climate or maybe a hostile neighbor, is really just one single variable among a dizzying, multifarious complexity of reality.
History is messy.
So messy. Geyl says it is incredibly ticklish, highly subjective work to just abstract one single element out of thousands and boldly declare it the definitive challenge that caused a civilization to rise.
Because Toynbee claims he's empirically proving his law by showing us, 20 cases from history where a hard challenge created a thriving civilization.
Yeah, he selects 20 specific cases.
But Geyl must be looking at this thinking, those are 20 cases selected out of literally 200,000 possible historical moments.
Exactly.
Toynbee is just retrofitting his data. If you have infinite historical incidents to pull from, you can find 20 puzzle pieces to prove literally any theory you want, provided you just throw all the non-fitting pieces in the trash.
Which is exactly what Geyl argues. He says the impression Toynbee makes is undeniably brilliant and super convincing, but the cases are entirely arbitrarily selected.
Wow.
Geyl's fundamental warning here is that taking historical facts completely out of their unique, never-to-be-repeated context to force them into a neat comparative pattern does violence to history.
Violence to history.
Yeah. You strip away the very context that gives the historical event its actual meaning in the first place.
And this abstract debate over methodology suddenly becomes incredibly concrete and honestly quite fiery when Toynbee tries to use Geyl's own homeland, the Netherlands, as the ultimate proof of his challenge and response theory.
Oh, this part is amazing.
Toynbee essentially walks right into the lion's den on this one.
He really does. It's the perfect microcosm of their entire debate. So, Toynbee advances Holland as this striking instance of his theory. In his writings, he claims Holland is a civilization that owes its rise to greatness purely due to the extreme, hard conditions created by the sea.
Okay.
The narrative he paints is highly dramatic. He says the people of Holland had to fiercely wrest their country from the water, building these massive dikes and reclaiming land. This terrific, relentless challenge against the ocean stimulated them to incredible feats of engineering, willpower, and eventually global commercial dominance.
I mean, it sounds like the perfect superhero origin story for a nation.
It's very cinematic.
The sea is the ultimate unforgiving adversary. The sheer willpower required to just not drown unlocked their cultural superpower. But Geyl's Dutch. He literally knows the granular history of the mud and the peat bogs. So what specific details is Toynbee conveniently leaving out here to make his neat little story work?
Geyl unleashes his localized expertise, and he does not hold back. First, he points out that the exposed, swampy parts of Holland were not made habitable solely by the isolated willpower of the locals.
Okay, who helped them?
They were made habitable with the heavy assistance of people dwelling in easier neighboring countries who had awakened to civilization much earlier.
Who specifically?
Specifically, the Romans and later Frankish influences.
Oh, wow. So they had a massive technological head start provided by outsiders.
Exactly. They weren't just figuring it out from scratch in the mud. Secondly, Geyl highlights geography. He says, look, once the Dutch actually tamed the water, the soil beneath proved to be incredibly excellent for agriculture.
Like prime farming dirt.
Some of the best. Furthermore, Holland's geographic location at the mouths of major European rivers was extraordinarily suitable for international commerce. It was a natural trade hub.
Ah. So Geyl is basically saying, yes, sure, we fought the sea. But you are completely ignoring the fact that we were sitting on top of some of the most fertile dirt in Europe, positioned perfectly on a continental trade route. And oh yeah, we had the Roman Empire giving us engineering tips.
Yes. Geyl accuses Toynbee of artificially isolating the hard conditions, meaning the sea from the multifarious complexity of reality and totally suppressing all those favoring conditions.
That is a serious academic burn.
And to make matters even worse for Toynbee's theory, Geyl notes that the core original Netherlands civilization didn't even originate in the...
That is a brutal dismantling of his premise. But Toynbee is a brilliant debater. He's not just going to fold and concede the point. How does he actually justify his interpretation of the Dutch struggle?
Toynbee mounts a truly fascinating defense. He argues that he uses illustrations from the small change of history, like the story of Holland, not really for their own sake, but to throw indirect light on the massive rare units he calls civilizations.
The small change of history.
Yeah, he's basically comparing the Dutch fighting the North Sea to the ancient Egyptians and Babylonians fighting the swamps of the Nile and the Euphrates to build the very first human civilizations. He's looking for the universal rhythm.
Okay, but looking for a rhythm doesn't answer Geyl's very specific accusations about the good soil and the Romans. How does Toynbee brush away those favoring conditions?
He addresses them head-on, actually, with a very sharp rebuttal. He says, yes, the Romans absolutely helped the Dutch, but the benefits of Roman efficiency and engineering were also enjoyed by Belgium, France, and England.
Oh, interesting.
Right. Roman apprenticeship was pretty common across Western Europe. Therefore, Toynbee argues, the Romans cannot possibly account for the achievements that are special to Holland and distinguish her from her immediate neighbors.
Yeah, okay, that's actually a really compelling counter. If the Roman engineering manual was just available in the library for everybody, why did only the Dutch leverage it to build that specific maritime empire?
Exactly. He turns the Roman argument around on Geyl. And as for the fertile soil and prime location for commerce, Toynbee drops his most famous argument of the entire debate right here.
What does he say?
He argues that the rich soil and the trade routes were not the causes of Holland's greatness. They were the effects and rewards of fighting the North Sea.
The effects.
Yes, he uses a biblical phrase to sum it up. To him that hath shall be given.
Wait, let me unpack that. Toynbee is arguing that you don't get access to the rich soil unless you possess the sheer spiritual willpower to drain the ocean off it first.
Yeah.
And the prime commercial location means absolutely nothing if your entire country is underwater. So the primary engine of their success was the willpower to fight the sea. The fertile soil was just like the prize they unlocked for winning the fight.
That is precisely his stance. For Toynbee, the unique distinguishing feature of the Dutch was the strength of will to raise their country out of the waters. Everything else, the trade, the agriculture, was just a secondary reward for that initial spiritual victory.
This is wild. We have two incredibly smart people looking at the exact same patch of historical mud and seeing two completely different realities.
Total opposite views.
Toynbee sees the ultimate triumph of the human spirit over adversity. Geyl sees a complex, messy convergence of geography, foreign influence, and pragmatic labor. Who is actually right here? Like, can both perspectives be true, or is one of them just fundamentally distorting reality?
Well, this leads to one of the most revealing moments in the entire broadcast. Toynbee actually concedes a major philosophical point to Geyl right here.
Really? He backs down.
Not backs down, exactly, but he acknowledges that a complex historical event can be legitimately analyzed in a number of different ways, all of which are true as far as they go. To explain this, Toynbee uses this brilliant analogy of dissecting an organism.
Oh, what's here the analogy?
Toynbee says that if you want to understand the nature of a biological organism, you can dissect it to lay bare the skeleton.
Okay.
Or you can dissect it to show the muscular system, or the nervous system, or the circulation of the blood.
Right, depending on what you're studying.
Exactly. No single one of these dissections tells the whole truth of the organism, right? But each reveals a genuine, vital facet of it.
Okay, I see where he's going with this.
Toynbee claims his macro-historical approach is just laying bare one genuine facet of historical truth. He says he's showing us the nervous system of human civilization.
So Toynbee is essentially saying, look, I'm writing a book about the nervous system. Geyl is furious that I'm not detailing the skeleton, but that's just a completely different kind of dissection.
That is exactly Toynbee's defense. He fully admits he is isolating variables, but he claims it's a necessary scientific abstraction to find these broader universal truths.
And how does Geyl take that?
Geyl is not buying it. He insists this approach is fundamentally dangerous. By ignoring all the messy complexity just to force history into a rigid 21 civilization pattern, Geyl says Toynbee isn't just showing one facet, he is creating a deterministic trap.
A trap.
Because if history must follow this exact cyclical pattern of challenge and response, what happens when a challenge is finally too big? And this leads us directly into the absolute darkest, most controversial part of Toynbee's entire theory, the inevitable breakdown.
Right, because if the engine of growth is successfully overcoming challenges,
Yeah.
what happens when a civilization inevitably faces a challenge it just cannot solve?
And Geyl attacks this dark second half of Toynbee's cycle with absolutely everything he has. He accuses Toynbee of basically paralyzing modern society with profound gloom and pessimism.
Gloom. Because Toynbee thinks we're all going to fail eventually.
Yeah. According to Toynbee's system, when a civilization fails to respond to a challenge, which, by the way, he stresses, is due to human shortcoming, not some iron necessity of nature, it breaks down and enters a long period of disintegration.
A total failure of human creativity.
Yeah.
But is there a chance to, bounce back? Like a renaissance?
No. According to Toynbee, once that specific breakdown occurs, the civilization is irretrievably doomed. The fatal crack in the foundation has happened.
Irretrievably.
Even the most active, original, courageous members of the society, the group Toynbee calls the creative minority, they are completely powerless to stop the collapse.
So the smartest people in the room can't even fix it.
They can't. They can fight rearguard actions, they can delay the inevitable, but they cannot prevent the final catastrophe. The organism is officially dying.
That is incredibly bleak for a 1948 audience to hear, especially right after the war. What does this process of disintegration actually look like on the ground, according to Toynbee?
Toynbee maps it out meticulously. The dynamic upward trajectory of challenge and response devolves into a pathetic downward spiral, he terms, rout and rally.
Rout and rally.
Right. The society loses its vibrant differentiation and its creativity, and it replaces all of that with rigid standardization.
Standardization.
Yeah.
So everyone just starts acting and thinking exactly the same.
Exactly. The creative minority that once led by pure inspiration loses its spark. They become a mere ruling class, just holding on to power through force and administrative bureaucracy rather than actual innovation.
And what happens to the rest of the people?
The vast majority of the population becomes totally alienated from this stagnant leadership, and they become what Toynbee calls a proletariat.
So they become emotionally and spiritually divorced from the very civilization they live in.
Yes.
So society basically flattens out into an oppressive, standardized grid. The innovators just become enforcers of the status quo, and everyone else just mentally checks out.
That's the breakdown. However, Toynbee does offer one massive caveat. It's this strange ray of hope within the disintegration.
A ray of hope in the gloom.
He argues that as the civilization slowly collapses, the alienated proletariat forms a universal church or some sort of new religious movement.
Okay.
And this church acts as a chrysalis. It carries the spiritual DNA of humanity safely through the Dark Ages until a brand new future civilization can eventually arise from it.
Okay. But for the actual humans living in the disintegrating civilization, being told, hey, your world is ending, but your new religion might spawn a really cool society in 1,000 years,
Yeah.
that is deeply depressing.
It's not great.
I can totally see why Geyl accuses him of paralyzing gloom.
And Geyl makes it intensely personal for the modern listener because he points out a really staggering detail in Toynbee's timeline. Toynbee actually suggests that our own Western civilization suffered its fatal breakdown centuries ago.
Wait, what? Centuries ago? When?
Toynbee points to the 16th century,
The 16th century.
specifically the wars of religion that tore Europe apart.
Let's unpack the mechanics of why Toynbee chooses that specific moment. Why would the wars of religion trigger a 400-year disintegration?
For Toynbee, the wars of religion represented the ultimate failure of Western society's spiritual cohesion.
Because they stopped being unified.
Right. The splintering of the medieval Christian church into these warring Protestant and Catholic factions destroyed the unified creative worldview of Europe. Instead of a shared spiritual destiny, the West completely fractured into rigid, competing national states that were totally obsessed with secular power and military dominance.
I see.
So the creative minority lost its universal spiritual appeal and just became these fractured, militaristic ruling classes.
So, by Toynbee's math, the last 4 centuries of Western history, I mean, we're talking the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, the rise of modern democracy, all of that is just the rout and rally of a dying organism.
That is exactly what it implies.
It implies we are literally just coasting on the fumes of a shattered civilization, marching blindly toward an inevitable collapse.
Unless, Toynbee suggests, we experience a miracle. He posits that the only way to perhaps avoid the final catastrophe is a reconversion to the faith of our fathers, a return to the absolute spiritual unity that was lost in the 16th century.
So his prescription is basically either a massive global religious revival or total doom.
That is exactly how Geyl reads it. Geyl argues this entire system induces just a profound sense of hopelessness. He calls it cold comfort.
Cold comfort, yeah.
Because if a modern citizen doesn't happen to believe in the efficacy of Toynbee's specific religious remedy, then Toynbee is essentially condemning all of our modern political, social, and economic efforts to absolute futility.
Right. Why even try to build a better democracy or a fairer economy if the civilization is already completely terminal?
Exactly. It breeds total apathy. Geyl insists that history simply does not work this way. He argues that good and evil tendencies, growth and decay, they exist simultaneously at every single stage of human history. The 16th century had horrific religious wars, yes, but it also had the Renaissance. The 20th century had World War II, but it also had incredible leaps in medicine and human rights.
So it's never just one or the other.
Right. Geyl argues the human intellect is simply not sufficiently comprehensive to weigh these massive opposing forces against each other and definitively predict before the event which tendency will ultimately win out.
Geyl is essentially telling the audience, look, you can't just declare the last 400 years of failure and say we are doomed. We've struggled before, we are struggling right now, and we've literally always managed to muddle through.
Precisely. Geyl firmly asserts that there is absolutely nothing in the historical record to shake our confidence that the future lies completely open before us. It is not pre-written.
But Toynbee is essentially telling a traumatized post-war world that they've actually been dying for 400 years. How does he even defend himself against this charge of being a doomsayer?
Toynbee mounts a very passionate, very personal defense here. He insists he is absolutely not preaching gloom, and to prove it, he draws a very sharp, specific line between his own work and the work of Oswald Spengler.
Spengler. He's the famous German philosopher who wrote The Decline of the West, right around World War I.
Right, and Spengler is the ultimate historical determinist.
His theory was that civilizations operate exactly like biological plants.
Right. They sprout in the spring, they bloom in the summer, they rot in the autumn, and they die in the winter. And there's absolutely nothing human beings can do to stop the seasons from changing.
Pure dogmatic determinism.
Toynbee completely rejects Spengler's fatalism. Toynbee fondly asserts that he is a huge believer in free will. He believes in humanity's freedom to respond with all its heart, soul, and mind when life presents a terrible challenge.
But wait, Toynbee still thinks we are currently in a period of disintegration. If
Mm.
you're telling people the ship is currently sinking, how is pointing that out not gloomy?
Toynbee argues that having serious misgivings about the state of the world isn't gloom. It is literally just facing the facts.
The realistic.
Yeah. He says, look at the historical record. The other 20 civilizations we know of have all eventually broken down, and we see some of those exact same symptoms. The standardization, the militarism, the alienated proletariats in our own recent history.
We'd be fools to ignore it.
Right. But Toynbee asks, what is the moral we should actually draw from this? It is surely not to shy away from the facts.
So he believes that diagnosing the disease is the first necessary step to curing it, even if the diagnosis is utterly terrifying.
Yes. Toynbee says that for Spengler, the diagnosis is a literal death sentence meant to paralyze our wills. Spengler says, fold your hands and just await the winter. But for Toynbee, uneasiness is a challenging call to action. Knowing the fatal mistakes of past civilizations provides us with a chart that warns us of the reefs ahead. Knowledge of the cycle is power, and it can be our salvation if we just have the spiritual courage to use it.
He uses a really powerful, poetic image to illustrate this exact point in the broadcast, doesn't he?
He does. He quotes a famous Greek epigram that perfectly encapsulates his whole mindset. The epigram runs, I am the tomb of a shipwrecked sailor, but don't let that frighten you off, brother mariner, from setting sail, because when we went down, the other ships kept afloat.
When we went down, the other ships kept afloat.
Yeah.
That is stunning. He is saying that the ruins of past civilizations, the Romans, the Mayans, the Babylonians, they are not proof that all sailing is doomed. They are just navigational hazards that we need to map out and learn from. We can steer around the reef if we actually know it's there.
Knowledge of past failures is a chart. And this debate over the very existence of that chart reveals the deepest, most fundamental philosophical divide between the two historians. What is the actual purpose of studying history, and can it ever truly be a science?
This is where the intellectual duel reaches its absolute peak, I think. Toynbee has some incredibly sharp words for historians like Geyl, who think history is just too complex to map out.
Toynbee really goes on the offensive here. He fiercely attacks what he calls the nonsense view of history.
The nonsense view.
Yeah, this is the highly empirical, hyper-specialized view that he claims has been fashionable among Western historians for the last few generations.
The nonsense view, meaning like the idea that history is just a random sequence of things happening one after another with absolute no connecting tissue.
Yes, he compares it to Shakespeare's famous line, a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Toynbee finds it totally bizarre that many modern historians defend this nonsense view on the grounds that refusing to look for patterns is somehow more scientific and objective.
Right.
He argues that historians who claim to just present the raw facts without any underlying theories are willfully ignorant of the workings of their own minds.
Because that's a psychological impossibility. You cannot present a fact without some internal criteria for why you chose that specific fact over a million others. Right. The very act of selecting a fact is an act of theorizing.
Precisely. Toynbee says, ideas are the machine tools of the mind. Every so-called objective fact presented in a history book has a hidden pattern of theory operating right behind it.
Whether the historian admits it or not.
Exactly. And to illustrate the danger of denying this, Toynbee uses a brilliant, very modern analogy for 1948. He compares a historian who is unaware of their own working ideas to a criminal motorist who first closes his eyes and then steps on the gas.
Leaving the public at the mercy of unconscious fool ideas? That is such a vivid image.
That's great.
You can't drive blind, and you definitely can't write history blind. If you don't know what theory is steering your selection of facts, you're just going to crash into your own biases.
Toynbee argues vigorously that if the human intellect can understand and manipulate physical nature, it shouldn't shrink from the harder, much more vital task of understanding human history.
He explicitly compares this historical mapping to the atomic bomb, which is incredibly potent for a 1948 broadcast.
Very potent.
Because splitting the atom is the ultimate triumph of the hard sciences, and it's super fresh on everyone's mind.
Right. Toynbee points out that the human intellect has wrested the ultimate secret from physical nature. We have discovered how to split the atom. But because we don't understand our own sociological patterns, we are in extreme danger of using that physical science to split the atom to our own complete destruction.
We're totally out of balance.
Exactly. He notes that the physical sciences have dangerously outpaced the science of man. Our technological discoveries and our social wisdom have gone forward at an uneven pace and got catastrophically out of step.
We have the technology of gods, basically, but the sociological mapping of cavemen. We know exactly how to build the bomb, but we have absolutely no scientific framework to prevent ourselves from dropping it.
Exactly. So Toynbee asks, is science to shirk trying to do anything about it? He champions the idea that history must become a science to save us.
How does he propose doing that?
He proposes using new scientific pincers to crack the nut of human nature. One arm of the pincers is the new emerging science of psychology, which is opening all these new horizons into human motivation. The other arm is the forbidding yet incredibly rewarding discipline of statistics. He believes that by actively applying psychology and statistics to the grand sweep of history, science is finally stepping onto the mental battlefield to help humans master themselves and set themselves free from the cycle of destruction.
Okay, this is a truly fascinating proposition, but let's pressure test it for a second.
Sure.
Splitting the atom relies on physics. And in physics, a proton always acts like a proton, whether it's in 1948, 2026, or 3 million years ago. A proton doesn't, have a bad day. It doesn't get influenced by a charismatic leader or join a new religious movement.
Right.
Human beings, on the other hand, are wildly unpredictable. We are messy, emotional, and heavily culturally conditioned. How does Geyl respond to this incredibly ambitious idea that history can just be calculated and charted using psychology and statistics?
Geyl rejects the comparison entirely. To Geyl, mastering the atom and mastering the historical process are fundamentally categorically different propositions. You cannot just apply the tools of physics to the tapestry of human choices.
Because protons don't possess free will.
Exactly. Geyl champions what he calls the infinite complexity of history. And when he says infinite, he doesn't just mean that the sheer volume of historical data is vast. He means that the very nature of historical phenomena is shadowy and changing.
Shadowy and changing. What does he mean by that?
Well, a revolution in 18th century France is fundamentally different from a revolution in 20th century Russia because the cultural, psychological, and economic contexts are entirely different. Because of this shadowy, ever-shifting nature, Geyl believes that any attempt to reduce history to a fixed mathematical relationship or to a grand scheme of absolute validity like Toynbee's 21 civilizations will only lead to severe disappointment and, honestly, dangerous policy.
Geyl must view Toynbee's laws of challenge and response as just a total illusion of order. It's humans looking at static on a television screen and convincing themselves they see a totally clear picture.
Yes. Geyl asserts that presenting a historical system in such a hard, fast, scientific manner makes it seem like the historian is dictating to the future. It strips all the agency away from the present moment, and Geyl feels absolutely bound to protest that rigid determinism on behalf of history itself.
But wait, doesn't Geyl's view leave us somewhat paralyzed?
How so?
Well, if history is too shadowy and complex to map, aren't we just sailing completely blind without Toynbee's chart? If there are no laws, what is the point of the historian at all? Why even study it?
Geyl actually anticipates that exact counterargument. He doesn't believe we are sailing completely blind. He actually agrees with Toynbee on a really crucial point. Raw facts do not speak for themselves.
Okay, so they agree on the nonsense view being bad.
They do. Geyl admits that he, as a working historian, is also constantly trying to establish general views of history. He openly states to the audience that without general views and interpretations, the massive records of the past would become utterly chaotic and completely senseless.
Right.
In fact, he jokes that if history were just listing random, meaningless dates, he would rather be an astronomer than devote his entire life to such a futile study.
So they actually agree that the historian's job is to synthesize and interpret, not just act as a human encyclopedia.
They do, but Geyl draws a profound line in the sand regarding how we view that interpretation. Geyl insists that the greatest, most vital function of the historian interpreting the past, to find sense and narrative in it, is simultaneously the least scientific and the most inevitably subjective of all human functions.
That is a staggering distinction right there.
Isn't it?
Toynbee thinks historical interpretation is an emerging hard science that will eventually yield these predictive laws to literally save humanity.
Yeah.
Geyl thinks historical interpretation is an art form. It gives us necessary perspective, it helps us make sense of who we are, but it can never, ever give us an absolute predictive law.
Exactly. And this incredible philosophical stalemate leads to a truly surprising moment of convergence as the 1948 broadcast wraps up.
A convergence after all of that.
Yeah. Despite their fierce, almost combative disagreements on the methodology, the overriding law, the origins of Holland, the charge of gloom, and the limits of science, they managed to actually find common ground at the very end.
How do two intellectuals with such diametrically opposed worldviews bridge that massive gap?
It happens when Toynbee clarifies his ultimate stance on how his grand theory should actually be used regarding the future. He firmly, publicly states that he does not set himself up to be a prophet.
Okay.
Despite the grand architecture of his 6 volumes, he explicitly says he does not believe history can be used as a crystal ball for telling the world's fortune.
So he fully backs away from hard scientific determinism at the end.
He does. He concedes that the study of history can perhaps show possibilities or even probabilities, but never certainties. He points to the awful warning of Spengler's dogmatic determinism as a trap to be completely avoided. And crucially, he tells the audience that he treats the future of our own Western civilization as a completely open question. The book is not finished.
And Geyl, the fierce skeptic, respects that humility.
He does.
How does Geyl respond to the idea of the open question?
Geyl lands on a beautiful quote from the brilliant 19th century Swiss historian Jacob Burckhardt to summarize his own view of their profession.
What's the quote?
Geyl quotes, "There is profound wisdom to be gained from the study of the past, but no definite lessons for the actual problems of the present."
Wisdom, but no definite lessons.
And Toynbee immediately agrees with that formulation. He says this shared respect for wisdom over prescriptive lessons brings their two vastly different approaches onto highly encouraging common ground.
It is quite a beautiful resolution to a really high-stakes duel. They fought tooth and nail over the mechanics, the muscles and bones of the historical organism, but they completely agree on the ultimate value of the enterprise itself. History doesn't give you a literal blueprint for tomorrow, but it gives you the deep wisdom to navigate it.
And Geyl even uses his final seconds on the BBC broadcast to pay a deeply respectful tribute to his opponent. He praises the immense intellectual courage with which Toynbee risked his neck to compose such a gigantic, breathtakingly impressive scheme.
That's a classy move.
It really is. Geyl admits that any scheme of that magnitude was bound to rouse intense skepticism from granular historians like himself. But even as a fierce critic, Geyl assures Toynbee that daring, imaginative spirits who try to map the whole cosmos have an essential, vital function to fulfill in the vast, ongoing enterprise of historical study.
So let's just synthesize the incredible journey we've just taken you on through these historical sources. We've moved from Toynbee's grand, imposing architecture of 21 civilizations, driven by the psychological and spiritual engine of challenge and response.
Right.
We saw how Geyl used the visceral knock-on-the-head metaphor to expose the dangerous subjectivity of Toynbee's golden mean of trauma. We zoomed way into the microscopic, intensely debated origins of Holland, arguing whether it was the sheer willpower to fight the sea or a complex luck of good soil and Roman neighbors that actually built an empire.
The skeleton versus the nervous system.
Exactly. And finally, we explored the massive philosophical clash between seeing history as a predictable statistical science versus seeing it as an infinitely complex, shadowy art form that offers deep wisdom but zero absolute guarantees.
And if we connect this intellectual duel directly to how you, the listener, consume information in your own life today, this 1948 debate is just profoundly relevant.
So relevant.
Every single day when you open a news app or you read a think piece claiming that our modern society is definitively doomed, or that we are obviously following a predictable historical cycle toward collapse, remember Toynbee and Geyl.
Ask those critical questions.
Yes. Ask yourself about the media you consume. Are these modern authors being transparent about the underlying theories shaping their selection of facts? Or are they criminal motorists driving with their eyes closed?
Are they cherry-picking 20 convenient cases out of 200,000 to make a neat, clickable pattern?
Exactly. Do their grand, terrifying narratives strip away the crucial, unique, multifarious context of our present moment?
That is the perfect analytical toolkit to take away from this. Always look for the skeleton in the nervous system. Don't let a grand narrative blind you to the messy reality on the ground.
Totally.
So to wrap up this deep dive, we really want to leave you with one last provocative thought to just mull over on your own. Let's return to Toynbee's concept of how a civilization actually begins to break down.
The rout and rally.
Right. He believed the ultimate failure of the society is characterized by standardization replacing vibrant differentiation. It happens when a creative, inspiring minority transforms into a rigid, administrative ruling class, standing over an increasingly alienated and standardized proletariat.
The classic symptoms of a disintegrating culture.
Keep that very specific dynamic in your mind. Now look around at our world today. Look at the digital spaces we inhabit all day, where algorithms service the exact same homogenized content. Look at the massive consolidation of our cultural output and the towering centralized economic structures of our modern era. When you look at all that, are you seeing the chaotic, messy, brilliant differentiation of a society energetically responding to a new technological challenge?
Whoa.
Or are you seeing the standardized, repetitive rout and rally of a civilization already hundreds of years into its disintegration? We'll let you be the judge of that.